Vincent Ramos is a longtime West Side resident. One morning, we met at the Spot coffee shop, where he sometimes sets up an office in the back room. There's an indie alt playlist and a crew of boisterous old men in the background as well. So, now there's that. Please enjoy the talk. Okay, so we are here with Vincent Ramos in Culver City, California. We're going to talk about his work, some of his larger issues of his work. He delves into the personal and the public in his work, and we're going to talk about that, and especially in his own words. We're going to get the story straight from him. And so thanks very much, Vincent Ramos, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So, any kind of background that you'd want to give us on yourself, like where you grow up, that kind of thing?
Well, I was born in Los Angeles, specifically Santa Monica. I grew up in Venice and lived there. I still live there in many ways. I'm kind of on the borderline. Yeah, and I should say we're at a coffee shop that is in Culver City, and so all of the background noise, whether you hear it or not, is generated from that experience.
Yeah, and the excitement of the eclipse going on right now, too.
Eclipse,
the place is buzzing with eclipse watchers.
We are feet away from a group of seniors that are into the eclipse, or at least one of them was, and drugged the other two out to see it with his, I think
begrudgingly,
his homemade pinhole camera. So, and he kind of chewed me out for having cords on the floor. But hey, man, when you're over 70, you can do whatever you want.
That's right. And it wasn't even you; it was us too. You took the brunt end of that.
Right. So
sorry about that, man.
So, no, it's all good.
We're trouble wherever we go. Yeah,
he warmed up to us very quickly. He invited us to look through the pinhole camera. But So I grew up on the West Side, and I'm still there today. Still living in the area, and I've been here all my life.
Okay, and so you went to Otis for your undergrad and then your master's at CalArts?
Yeah, so
what was that like?
Well, it was good. The story kind of starts a little bit before that. I got out of high school in the early 90s, very early 90s here in Venice, in Los Angeles, and was involved in a program through an organization called SPARK, Social and Public Art Resource Center, in Venice, and hooked up with them and was working with them for a number of years. Was in a program that was brand new called the CAP program, CalArts Partnership something or other, that has been around now for, I guess, over 25 years. I was in, I believe, the first group or iteration of that. It's, in a nutshell, it's CalArts has this program that goes out to different neighborhoods in Los Angeles and gives art enrichment to the neighborhood kids in various parts of the city. So one of the first ones was in Venice, and I was like 18, maybe 17, and got involved with that. And then from there, met a lot of local artists and kind of did the art assistant thing for a while. And all the while, I was going to Santa Monica College, taking a class here, a class there. And then through a lot of mentorship with some of these other artists, they convinced me to go to school. And, I just essentially applied to Otis because it was like so close to my house.
Yeah.
And they had just moved maybe 2 or 3 years prior
to
Westchester from the MacArthur Park area. And, I literally just dumped my transcripts, which at that point were pretty thick because I had been to Santa Monica so long. And I says, what can I do with this? And so I was able to go in as a second year. I didn't have to do foundation as a result, and that kind of started the journey. So I was there for 3 years. It was a real great program, met a lot of great artists. A lot of them I still am very close with today. And then after that, I got out in 2002, and then it was one of these things where I just kind of kept applying to grad school and getting rejected. Then after 3 years, I got some, I was invited to participate in some programs. I got accepted, and I chose CalArts, and I went there. So I was there for 2 years, from 05 to 07. And
so that's far from the west side.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that's,
what did you do there? Did you commute? Did you live out there?
Yeah. No, I commuted, man. At that point, I was married. I was, I was totally had a, I had other obligations. So
yeah.
So and I was a bit older. I was like in my mid-30s. And I was from here. So I commuted. I just kind of did it. Not every day, but three times a week, 4 times a week. Just kind of figured it out. And it was.
It's a brutal drive.
It was a bit of a beast, for a while. You kind of get the hang of it after a while. Just kind of get numb to the traffic.
Yeah.
And then you just, you do things where you create a class schedule that doesn't have you like, on the 405 at 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
Maybe has you, at like noon or something, or 11:30, so that it's.
Yeah, when you're trying to maintain having a marriage at the same time, it's stressful.
Yeah, maintaining everything, so,
That's the big balancing act for artists, huh? Is just balancing everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Luckily it was only a 2-year program, so, it was a 2-year sacrifice, and so it wasn't that bad overall, But it got a little tough at times, and luckily, if you're with someone who is supportive, then it makes it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's.
So, just changing up gears a little bit to the work a little bit. Not too far from that time period. Actually, this is a few years after you got out of CalArts. I think for me, one of my favorite pieces of yours, but also one that I think gets a lot of recognition, is I want to phrase it right, so I'm actually going to look at it. Motown took us there, and Motown brought us back.
Yeah, so that was actually a piece that I started at CalArts, and pretty much what I worked on the whole time I was there.
So for 2 years, you just filled sandbags. Describe the piece a little bit for our viewers. Why that was a funny joke.
Actually, that's pretty funny. Felt like it at times. A giant hourglass. It's kind of a weird trajectory of things, but when I was, it was right around the time I applied to CalArts. The dates are kind of fuzzy here, but my older brother was in Iraq, and he, I guess he had some downtime there, and he was messing around with a computer, and he was looking up some things, and he had found some information on an uncle of mine who was in Vietnam and was killed there in the summer of 1967. And this brother that I'm talking about, my brother, he was born just weeks after, and also in the summer of 67, and was named after him as a result of my uncle passing away just like 2 or 3 weeks before he was born.
Wow.
So now here he is, he's in Iraq, however, 30 years later or whatever, 40 years later, around almost 40 years later, and he had found some images online, So, I don't know, he told my mom or something, so then I went searching around as well, and it was from this website that, looked kind of homemade, belonged to this guy, and it was all about this division that he was in and that my uncle was in as well. So, I contacted the guy. I said, hey, I'm a nephew of this man, and thanks for putting up the images, blah blah blah. And so then he and I got into a discussion, and he says, yeah, if you have any more photos and stuff, I knew your uncle a little bit. I was in a different company than he was, but we were all part of, I don't know how it works, but they were all part of this division, the 9th Infantry.
Okay.
And there's different companies. My uncle was in Charlie Company. He was in A or B Company, one of the other ones. But they all were in boot camp together, and he was there when he died. And so I went, and it turns out, I didn't know where this dude lived. He didn't know where I lived. He actually thought the whole time that I lived in Washington State, because that's where my uncle was from.
Okay.
And finally, I said, no, man, I live in Venice. I'm in Southern California. He says, well, I'm in Valencia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I said, oh, shit,
You're like,
okay.
I'm going to school in Valencia.
Well, it's funny because I said, you know what? I'm going over there to drop off my materials because I'm applying to Cal Arts. And he says, well, I live off McBean Parkway, which is where, Cal Arts is.
Yeah.
And so I said, shit, okay. So then I said, well, after I drop off my stuff, can I come see you? And he says, yeah. So then I, dropped off my things to apply. I'm assuming I dropped them off because, I was too late to mail them or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I dropped them off, and then right after I went to go see him. He lived literally like, if that, 10 minutes away, And I dropped off some more photos. He scanned them and did everything else, and we had a little bit of a discussion. And this guy was essentially the kind of glue with his website to all these other cats, that they were in the military with. So, I gave that stuff to him. I dropped off my stuff, came back home, and then, I don't know, a month or so later, I found out that I had been accepted into the program at Cal Arts. So I, ultimately went in the fall of 2005. And while I was there, just kind of figuring out, like, what should I do? And I remembered this guy, and I started thinking about a project that I could do that would, talk about this history and somehow incorporate what I knew up to that point into a project. So I had asked him, this guy's name was Bill, I asked Bill, if it was possible to talk to some of these other men. And he says, yeah, absolutely. And, I kind of told him what it was for and what I was thinking. And the only thing he told me was, some of them are they don't really like to talk about their combat experience and this and that, and which is understandable. So then I thought about it a while, and I said, okay, well, what if, I'm thinking to myself, what if I came up with something that talked about it, but at the same time didn't talk about it directly? And so my idea was to really focus on, like, this idea of memory and popular music and what they remembered from that time,
Yeah, and how it sort of frames the context of the time.
And, as a result, maybe I would get to know some more things about my uncle and ultimately pass this information down to my family, like my dad, my dad was his older brother, and aunts and uncles and people that his family that were still here and that maybe had a lot more questions than I did, or different kinds of questions. So I went back to this guy Bill, and I said, I got this idea, talk about music and this and that, and it was a very interesting time for that. And so he gave me just this master list of names and addresses and phone numbers, all broken down in a company and this and that. So I just started, essentially what I did was I wrote a letter and, typed it out and, personalized it and mailed all these letters, probably close to like 100 or something.
Wow.
And to all these different people.
So you're like compiling data at this point.
Yeah, so then slowly I started getting letters back, different people. and handwritten letters talking about, and ultimately at the end, I probably got maybe 25 to 35 handwritten letters back. A lot of people just called me out of the blue,
Yeah.
didn't bother with the letter just because I
Yeah.
had my phone number there, and they just like straight up called me. Other folks I never heard from. Some people I had to pursue, and once it just kind of opened up this, in a good way, this kind of can of worms.
Yeah.
So I started talking to these guys, and on the phone primarily, and just jotting down notes and things. And I told them who I was. The people in my uncle's company, this Charlie Company, C Company, where they of course they knew him quite well. They were all part of the same group.
Yeah.
The other companies, some of them knew him. Many of them were there the day he was killed, so they remember him in that capacity. There was, I don't know, X amount of people killed that day, and he was one of them. So I got into a really good dialogue, and some of them gave me like anecdotes and their memories, and so I in turn kind of passed that material along to primarily my dad, and other family members, and also, it should be explained that when I don't know how it is now, but back then when someone was killed, they really wouldn't give you specifics about how your loved one died,
Yeah.
It was one of these things where it would be like a MIA, missing in action, or KIA, killed in action. So, in this instance, or in that time, they would literally, like you see in the movies, they would come to the door and they would tell you, look, this is what happened, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. But they really wouldn't give you the details. And so, here for 40 years, they really didn't know kind of what happened. And of course, these guys knew because they were there. you
Yeah.
know. And not only that, on my uncle's official military death records, it said that he died on June 20th, and all of these guys says, no, it's bullshit. He died on June 19th. They probably recovered the body on June 20th,
Yeah.
but on June 19th he was killed. So even like things like that about the day he died,
Right, yeah.
were always it was always wrong, So at least in government, documents and things, official stuff, but this unofficial, firsthand accounts and things like that, they kind of told us, what happened.
Yeah, and then how did the music come into
So then-
it? And then
so-
they
yeah, so
started.
then-
Was that your like entry point?
Yeah, so that's my entry point. So then, ultimately, we will get into these discussions about music, and its importance or its non-importance. I mean, it really ran the gamut, and really the motivation for that began with something I had read many years ago. When I was a little kid, like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11, in there, and this is like early to mid 80s, there was a real big resurgence about looking at the Vietnam War differently, and, making, the memorial went up in the early 80s.
Yes.
Which was a big deal. So there was like this sense of like healing, and it took like almost 10 years for people to just...
Yeah, I remember even the search for the artist to make the memorial was even
right,
a publicized thing.
Yeah, it was like a big to do, and also, if you remember, I think, and the artist is Maya Lin, a very famous artist now.
Yeah.
But then I think
Then
she was a
wasn't.
student.
Yeah, she might have been a
student.
grad student at the time.
Yeah, and if you look back at that history, at that moment, a lot of people didn't like the memorial, just the plans for it.
Yeah, they felt it was very austere.
Yeah, very
and,
cold, and
they were
and,
expecting a statue.
Right, which is
And we were
in this day and age
ending
when
the
we're talking
line-
about statues and stuff. Yeah, they wanted something more kind of traditional.
Yeah.
And but she had a whole other vision, and of course, this vision was like the vision.
Right,
this is probably one of the most
It is the most visited war memorial in America.
Yeah, absolutely. And just visually, I mean, it's, if you go there, I've been there, and the reflection and seeing yourself and the names and just the whole vastness of it. It's just beyond
there's
heavy,
a whole museum for just the artifacts that people leave there
right.
now.
And then people leave things there, and they really, it's just quite the experience. So I don't know where we went off on that, but yeah, we discussed that as well. But I know what I was going to say. So when I'm a kid, all this stuff is happening, and movies like Platoon come out. I think in the mid '80s. There's TV shows about Vietnam. There's all this really resurgence of the '60s, even with the music, and there was a lot of 20 years after the '60s, and so there was a lot of CD reissues and a lot of these old. I keep in my head. I keep thinking about the Monkees. The Monkees came back, and toured again, and it was just a big to do, right? So I'm growing up in the midst of all this, and so the article that I read initially, which was a long time ago, talked about how in a lot of the films of the '80s that really focus on Vietnam, that the music was wrong. And what this author proposed was that because of the racial makeup of many of the soldiers, because of the economic, that they were all working class, that it was a different kind of music that was actually played there and listened to by the soldiers. And their argument was that, well, the folks like Francis Ford Coppola and all these other people that made films beginning in the 70s and into the 80s, many of these people, probably with the exception of Oliver Stone, who made Platoon and who was a veteran, many of them didn't know the experience firsthand. Many of them were college students at that time, and in various ways part of the anti-war movement and whatever. But they were in film school. All the big guys were in film school. The George Lucases, the Spielbergs, the Coppolas. That was the moment. And so they're saying what they were doing was they were projecting their own experiences into those films as opposed to who was really there, which were working class people, blacks, Chicanos, poor whites, whomever. And the author was arguing that, as a result of that, there was a lot of R&B music played there. There was a lot of country music played there. And whatever. And there was rock and roll as well, and blah, blah, blah. So, knowing or thinking about this article, I just kind of started talking to people, and, essentially asking them, if they had songs that they remembered from that time, songs where there were specific memories, associated with their time in Vietnam. So, I worked on this all throughout CalArts. And really didn't produce a lot of work, like objects, but just did a ton of research, I was always on the phone with somebody. I was always, during that time, they had a reunion in Washington, D.C., my last year at CalArts. And so I went to that and took my dad and my mom and some of my aunts to that, and that's where I saw the wall and met these guys in person, and so that was yet another layer. I had been doing all this research and talking to guys on the phone and this and that, but then I went and I was able to meet all these people.
Is this the experience that changed everything for you in your work as far as making work come from research base?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in grad school, of course, you have the time to do stuff like this. Now that I've been out of grad school, I still work this way, but it's not like, I'm juggling all this other stuff as well. So it's a little bit harder. But yeah, I mean, that was a really big, research project. And yeah, I mean, I that was the one I really cut my teeth on and just kind of learned from and really just dove into it, And I had not really done that. I'd done it a little bit prior to that, but not to this extent. I mean, this took up years and years of my life,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was the first one. And then after that, it has been that kind of blueprint, but, sometimes it's more elaborate, other times it's not, just depending on deadlines and things like that. And but there's things that it's funny, all of my projects, even that Vietnam piece, they're all based on some aspect of the archive, right? Because it's all kind of based on like objects and things. So, once I'm done, quote unquote, done with a project, it's really not done because, if I, like I did those shows on Vietnam, and if they ended and I just did whatever, if a month later I find some cachet of objects or images or something online that just totally blows my mind, then that gets added to that archive after the fact. And if I ever were to do the project or restage it, then of course with everything that I've picked up since that time, it will change that project, right?
Yeah.
So everything is all the projects, and there's not that many at this point. They're all kind of, I'm always searching for things that are connected.
That's a really good segue to what I wanted to talk about next, which was a science fiction film.
Oh, yeah.
And
right.
Because there's an element of time in these works too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
time travel.
And what you were talking about just now about how the pieces can change over time.
Right.
And that's okay. It doesn't have to be this static
object
that exists.
Everything is very process oriented, with everything that I do. So yeah, absolutely. And I'm making all these works now, and to be very blunt, I'm working with limited resources. In a perfect world, if I would have had whatever, copious amounts of time, research,
yeah, giant studio with a bunch of assistants and all the money you need.
Right, then they would
giant
change.
grant. Yeah,
there you go. Huh? So it's always based on where I'm at, just on everywhere in my head, economically, what's going on around me,
Yeah, but that all informs the work. And
absolutely, that's just that's the way artists do it. That's art history. That's what it is. What it is,
Right.
So I totally accept that. But it's like, since the work's kind of, they're not like a painting. I make the painting and then it just is there. It's, if I ever do it again, these big installations, and I'm totally, whatever. If I were to restage that Vietnam piece now, in the midst of what's going on right now, it would look different.
Yeah, absolutely.
So so that was really
so
good.
I don't want to bring this up on like a morbid kind of a stage, but like what happens after your death?
What happens after
at that point, are they frozen in time?
Yeah, I guess. Well, it depends on what it is. I mean,
I'd also just like to say, you don't give a fuck about commodity, do you? You don't give a shit.
You know what, man? I don't know, man. It's like, what are they gonna do?
Collectors just run screaming from you.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. That's not true.
I've had a few interactions with collectors and with galleries at this point. It's never nice. It's always a bloodbath with me. Huh? Yeah, no, I don't
this
know.
Is just shaking your head.
No, man, because we're only products of the moment, but also kind of our own personal heroes and heroines, just in art history, So the people that I was really attracted to, and that I'm really indebted to and influenced by. Many of them didn't really have. They weren't big, champions or benefited from the market too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, one of the guys I always go back to is a guy named Wallace Berman, who was a huge influence on me, and still to this day is. And I don't know if Berman ever sold, I don't know, more than a handful of things in his lifetime,
Yeah, and almost
but doesn't
everybody.
Mean the work isn't potent. I mean, the work is like,
Sure.
It cuts like a knife, and it's very much of that moment.
Well, I think everybody. It's funny, everyone that we've ever talked to considers themselves to be a mid-career artist.
Yeah.
And it's really brought up this discussion that you get about 1 year before your mid-career, and then everybody hits the mid-career slump, and then you get 1 year at the end.
Yeah,
that's it for you,
No one ever knows what that means,
Yeah,
when all the grants come around, I always see these things on Facebook, like, what am I? Can someone explain to me what I am? Am I emerging? Am I mid-career?
Right?
Am I,
Yeah.
I mean, everyone asks that question.
Be emerging as long as you possibly can,
right?
right?
It's like, I don't know, there's all these very fluid definitions of what these things are, and
Yeah.
who knows, man, you know.
Yeah.
So
So back to science fiction.
yeah.
Could you kind of just go through just nuts and bolts on like what the materials were, why you selected them, and then a little bit behind what the piece is about?
Okay,
and-
so that piece, which I like very much still, was I was actually invited by a curator named Pilar Tompkins Rivas, who was then Pilar Tompkins, to participate in a show at 18th Street Art Center. I don't know when this was, maybe 2000, 2009 actually. And I'm blanking out on what the show was called, but it was a show that was very much kind of looking at the kind of current political climate, and I think the show had America in it, the title, and there was some kind of talk of immigration and just kind of what was going on. And I had thought about it. I was invited to participate. She came by and checked me out in the studio and stuff. And I wanted to do a project that was somewhat collaborative. That I worked. The project would come out of doing a workshop with some students. And I had talked to an old teacher of mine, my old high school teacher, who was still at the high school that I taught at, and who was actually retiring. Him and his wife taught there, and they were retiring that year. That whatever, this was in the spring, and that was going to be their last semester there, after being there, a long time, 25 years or something like that. So I came to them and I said, hey, can I kind of do this really quick workshop where I work with some of the kids, and it's for this art show, and we'll work on something, and we'll show this thing, whatever it is. I'm not quite sure. And so they knew me and stuff. They said, okay, we'll figure it out. And so I had this idea. The show, and now it's all kind of coming back to me now. The show was about projecting into the future what Los Angeles would look like. And so this was 2009. It was about looking at the crystal ball and trying to figure out how and what Los Angeles would be like in 10 years, I guess. So it was 2019 was the idea. Now we're 2 years away from that, but at this point it was 10 years away. And so I decided to do this piece about history, once again kind of thinking about the past to kind of comment on the present and the future, which I've always been doing since beginning with that Vietnam project, really. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, teach this thing about kind of local Venice history, what was going on in the past, but maybe we could kind of figure out what will happen in the future as well. And so then we worked from a book of short stories that was The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury, which was I don't know if it was his first book of short stories, but it was one of the first, published I think in the early 50s. And so that was kind of the starting off point. I showed them a lot of films. I essentially talked to them about the 50s era, and science fiction and real B-movie stuff, also the literature and everything else, and trying to make sense of that stuff to kind of comment on our future,
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff was about the future at that time,
Yeah.
and a lot of it was real, lowbrow B-movie,
Sure, yeah.
DIY,
Yeah.
which all that stuff I love.
Yeah.
Which is another reason.
And all that work talks about its own time more than it talks about the future.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Now that we can look back on it and kind of dissect it, and whatever, all of, absolutely. Many of that stuff, people have looked back on it and say, okay, this was about that, and blah, 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 blah. So, but my thought is along the same kind of sensibility, always. So knowing that, okay, I'm doing this now, but what happens when you can look at it 20 years from now? Will it be representative of that moment? Will it be, potent in this moment, whatever it is, and yada yada yada. So I did that. At the small workshop, we did a little bit, a few projects here and there. Showed them some films. Talked about a little bit of the local history. Bradbury was a guy who lived in Venice when he was a young person, and at the time of this project, he was still alive. So I had reached out to him. I sent him a letter, snail mail letter. I found his address somewhere, on the internet. You could find everybody's address at this point. So I sent him a letter, explained to him what I was doing. And at that time, he was really ill and was slowing down considerably. So he sent me a letter back. We had sent 2 or 3 things to one another, and his were really cool. It was like he would write all over draw all over the envelopes, and he had these Edgar Allan Poe stamps, and he put one on there, and then he put right next to it, he put Ray's grandfather or something, like, essentially saying, that I'm a descendant of Poe,
Sure, right.
So,
his literary grandchild.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and all these like kind of somewhat cryptic notes, and he was actually at that time, he had wrote a play. I don't know if it was a new play or they had restaged it, but it was going to be in North Hollywood where all the little strip of theaters are at.
Yeah.
So he invited me to that. So I went to the play, and he was there, but he was really kind of in bad shape. He had like an assistant. He was in a wheelchair, and I went and I spoke to him for a while, just for a few minutes, and told him that I was the guy, and so hopefully he understood that, and he had probably died. Essentially, I wanted his blessing,
Yeah.
and which I think he gave me, and he died maybe about 6 months after that or something. After that time that I saw him, and we went through that exchange of two or three letters to one another. But I used his book and his history there as a starting off point, but I also talked about my which I don't think I mentioned before. My history there in Venice is very long. My family had been there probably since the 30s, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And my mom was born, same thing, born on the West Side, raised in Venice, and went to Venice High School. And so I talked about to the kids, like at that time when my mom went to school there, she graduated in '59, that, there wasn't, that many Latino students, that many Mexican-American students there. There was a substantial amount, but nothing like it was when they were there,
Right.
And I'm assuming it's grown even more since. I mean, they were like, when I was there in 2009, I don't know, they were like something like 75 or 80% of the population,
Wow.
Where maybe back in '59 or in the '50s, maybe there were maybe not even 25%, 25%, and I could have those numbers wrong, but that's what it seems like. And so I explained to them like these kinds of histories, this notion of aliens and what it all means, things that were happening in the '50s here in Los Angeles that looked at different minority groups, specifically Mexican Americans. The big Chavez Ravine story was in the '50s. This thing called Operation Wetback was in the '50s. So all of these things were happening at that time. And in talking about in 2009 what was going on with immigration and stuff like that. So, and now here we are 10 years later, and just the it's even, the dialogue
it's
is even
amplified
more.
even more.
Yeah. There's even more rhetoric and stuff. So, so we did this project, and also there was an introduction of the history of the kind of West Coast bohemian assemblage movements of like with people like Berman and George Herms and all those folks, and how Venice, played somewhat of a part in that. There was some artists there. I forgot.
And that informed the aesthetic of the piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For that reason, but also for the very real reason that I had zero budget. So it's.
But also, you were trying to incorporate all these other people and these notions, and have. It sounded like you were trying to go for some sort of a. You're bringing the community into the thing,
absolutely.
but then you were also so. it's a little bit of chaos involved. There's a lot of chance.
Yeah, like always, you have this idea, you think it's brilliant, and then, you're in the midst of it, you go, man, what the hell did I do, man? Like, this is like crazy, and it happens every time, all my salt and pepper now, or beard and hair, or getting there with the hair is probably as a result of a lot of the stress of trying to get these things done,
Yeah.
It's like, it's totally irrational because, of course, with all artists, you have these big, grandiose ideas, and then reality seeps in.
But don't you have to try to go all the way there just to maybe even get halfway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, no, there was a bit of chaos and many layers to the project. And so what they did was, on many levels, because now that I think about it, here they were towards the end of the semester, right before summer. Many of them were seniors, as soon as school they graduated, I lost like 3/4 of the class. Like, they were done, man.
They're just
like,
gone.
Yeah,
They're
like,
in
whatever,
the wind.
dude. So I had this real skeleton crew of kids. I don't know if there was any seniors in there, maybe one, and that was only because her sister was one of the younger ones, and she kind of drug her along to it.
Yeah.
But so they had wrote this kind of very loose script about time travel. I don't even know what it was about at this point, but we met after school had ended and kind of shot these still images. And ultimately, what I wanted to do was make a science fiction film, but with no film background and no money, no anything. I don't know how to do anything whether with real film or just in the digital sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the group Osco, and a lot of the kind of what they call no movies and things. So what they were doing was they were photographing still imagery, and essentially just saying that it was a movie. So I like that. This is good. And so we shot a lot of still imagery, and they had made some costumes, and everything was found. I mean, there was things that were found on campus. There was a thrift store that I go to in Venice where the guy just cuts me major deals, and I told him what I was doing, so he just gave me a bunch of stuff. I would drive around the city and like on the weekends, like after they have yard sales and stuff isn't sold, they just leave it out there,
Mm-hmm.
So I would pick up stuff like that. And then what was great was because the teachers, like I said, were retiring, they were just cleaning out all of their stuff, and there was just like 25, 30 years of stuff that they were just dumping. So all of this played a part in the creation of the actual objects and props and things that were part of the project. And there's one kind of large piece that is supposed to be like a spaceship, and that is a table that was used because it's just pure steel, heavy, super heavy, but it's a table that was used in one of the science classes at the school.
Yeah, I love this. This is my aesthetic.
This
is like I want all my work to look like not just handmade, but just like middle school play. That's what I'm going for.
I like that aesthetic.
These guys
well.
have heard me say that before. I talked to them about it.
Yeah.
It's super disarming to audiences.
Yeah. Especially now everything is so slick,
Yeah.
Whatever, So
I hear you, it works
on
on this level.
Yeah.
And it allows you to have an audience come into the work with fewer preconceived notions, with more open-mindedness.
Okay.
Is my experience. That's how I see them react to work that has that aesthetic. All of a sudden they're involved in the play.
Right. I got you. Okay, I can see that. Yeah. And with the installations that I do as well, and with this one specifically, it was very small, but it was still, there was so much stuff kind of shoved in the corner there that you had to walk in there, and you as a viewer had to be a part of it, in some capacity, because before you knew it, you were right in the thick of it,
Mm-hmm.
Once we did all the shooting there on the campus, and it was after school was out, maybe like the week after school ended, so there was no one on the campus. Michael Jackson had just died, and I remember that because for some reason the first day we shot the stuff, we shot these images. For some reason, they were testing their PA equipment. So they were like, they had it hooked up to like K-Earth 101 or something. So they were just playing Michael Jackson songs all throughout the school. While we're shooting this thing, it's like, Thriller and Beat It, and for like all day, and I don't know if it was, the teachers were like cleaning out the rooms, but I don't know what it was about, but it was really eerie.
There's just more chaos,
more
element of chance thrown into this piece.
So luckily there was no actual filming with, sound, because you would have heard it's like a soundtrack of Michael Jackson behind. But if you look at all those images, that is what's playing in the background, is Michael.
That is so cool.
A constant.
No one would ever know this, looking at this piece, right?
Yeah, he had died. I don't know what day he had died, but it was like, I don't know if it was the day after or something. It had just happened,
Yeah.
So that was something I always remember, So we did it. We did as much as we could. They ultimately had to go home. They were all students, and then I finished up everything in my little studio, and then probably a month later or a few weeks later, I showed it within the space. So if you walked in the space, the props were there, and then all of the photos I had printed out, and there was this kind of nonlinear thing happening where you could see these pictures, and they were just like, machine prints, 4x6, whatever the average photo is, and from Costco or whatever, and they're just kind of glued onto these different pieces of junk. But I used all this other stuff, and it just was crazy, It was all this stuff that I had found, and I essentially brought into the gallery. And, with all the projects, because I've never had with the exception of a brief period where I had a real substantial studio space in terms of size, everything is done on site. So I don't really have a space to put stuff together. I just do it during the install process.
Yeah.
It's never like, oh, okay, I have a space to do this. I put it up. It looks good. I make the changes. Let's take it down and take it to the gallery. That's never happened. Yeah. It's always like at the gallery, I'm just making decisions. You have a week. You have 2 weeks to figure it out. So that's, that was that project.
And it's been this way for years. And so how have you adapted your thinking and your work, and does that inform the imagery, and do you now work inside of that process, and have you been able to refine it, and then?
I think so. You learn a lot from each one. The thing that
all of your pieces, their aesthetic is very much seems to be determined by the parameters of the piece, the idea.
Which I think a lot of people that work in installation, they have to deal with it, and they have to do it that way for many reasons. So definitely thinking about the space, and I think that probably gets better. Just to kind of fast forward a little bit to the new project, I feel really good about it. I have adequate space, and I just had time. A lot of it is time to really kind of think about it. Where some of the other ones, and I was a younger artist then, and different kind of circumstances, and and when you're in those processes, you're starting out, you don't really have a lot of options. So, it was always very quick, very fast.
Yeah.
So, I've learned. The thing that sucks, the thing that is the most problematic is that I always bring in more than I need, instead of being in a perfect world very refined in terms of, okay, I know what I'm going to use. I figured it all out beforehand. I'm going to take it there. I'm going to put it up, done, blah, blah, blah. I have time to think about it. Since I don't have that time, I was like, well, I may use this. I may use this. I may use this. I don't know, And so let's take it all in there, figure it out. So I think in some cases that freaks people out, I think when I did the Made in LA thing, I brought in a lot of stuff in that space, and they were like, "What is this shit, man? You opening up a junk shop in here? What the fuck?" But you refine it, and you figure it out, So it has gotten a little bit easier.
So in the new piece that you just installed, this is at the Charles White space, or
this one's at LACMA.
At LACMA.
Yeah.
Okay. It's 4 Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah, everyone's confused by the 3 venue thing.
Yeah.
So to kind of briefly attempt to break it down, it's a 3-venue exhibition. Initially, 16 artists were asked to participate for a show at LACMA. So I'm one of those artists. Mm-hmm. And so we all have projects inside LACMA in, I guess is that the BCAM building? The Broad?
Yeah.
The Broad building? And so that is the show. But there's also, and the show is called A Universal History of Infamy. There's also 2 other shows that are also called Universal History of Infamy, but they have their respective subtitles. And those shows are connected to this larger show. So one show is at 18th Street Art Center, and it has, I guess, 15 artists. I'm not participating in that show. And then the show at Charles White, like you just mentioned, they asked me to organize an exhibition there. So that's another project that's outside of my own work for the LACMA show, if that makes any sense.
And just for people who might not know or listening out there, Pacific Standard Time
very quickly,
the Gettys.
From what I know of it, this is a Getty-sponsored initiative. They front the seed money for a series of exhibitions that take place all throughout Southern California. They have done, I believe this is their 3rd iteration. The first one dealt with the history of Los Angeles. And so there was just a whole slew of exhibitions about LA art history. I think it was like kind of post-war to like 1980 or something.
Yeah.
And, like literally from, small college galleries to the big museums here and everything in between. There was just, and I think it went from like Santa Barbara to Palm Springs to San Diego and everywhere in the middle, in between. There are these series of shows. So they did this first PST. It was very successful. Everyone dug it,
Got behind it.
And then they did a very small one, I think, that dealt with Los Angeles architecture. And there were some real good shows in that one that I saw. And now they had this idea to do one called PST LA, Pacific Standard Time, Los Angeles, Latin America, that looked at the influence of Latinos in Latin America on the city and vice versa. And it's, a big to-do that they are about to kick off. I think most of the shows open probably early next month, September. And but LACMA is opening some of theirs up earlier than that, and that's where kind of we are right now. So it's a big citywide thing.
Yeah.
And it's hopefully as successful as the past 2. So it's good.
Yeah, and so like a big honor for any artists, I feel like, who are involved in any year. It's a big
absolutely.
Deal.
Yeah, no, it was it was a pretty neat thing for them to come and check me out and check out the work, and of course, to be invited is a big deal. So, that's the thing. You don't know who's looking at any given point. So,
right.
I'm not someone that was
definitely don't. Yeah.
That was like on the scene on any level, especially in a kind of commercial sense. But I kept working and chipping away, and I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So luckily, in this case, it paid off. So
yeah. So something else that we like to do in the show is the basic concept of this show is, instead of doing this like interviews trying to take on what we're trying to do is sort of a big project. It's like we're trying to get every influential artist, curator, gallery, or museum director in LA. But instead of doing it hierarchical or linear or alphabetically or some other way, we're basically just trying to like pull the threads of artists that I know, and then asking those artists, like, who do you find in LA to be inspiring? Who do you enjoy their work? And then basically it's like we take it on as a challenge for us to go out and find that artist.
Okay.
And of course, Juan Capistran, you were the only artist he wanted.
Oh, yeah? Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't put a limit on how many
Thanks,
you can
Juan.
give us, But no, literally, you were one.
Yeah.
Later on, we were able to pull one more out of him, but we don't put a limit on it. But he was like, yeah, I want Vincent Ramos. That's it.
Yeah,
was
that's funny.
And he came out like right out with
yeah?
it. Like a lot of people need time to think about like, oh, who do I really like out here right now? So having said all that, who would you like to hear from on our podcast as far as an artist,
man.
an LA artist?
Putting me on the spot, huh? Let's see, huh?
No, well, I mean, you don't have to do anything. It's up to me, and knowing from experience, I will punish them with emails until I get them, like I did to you.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. One of, let's see here. God, there's so many people that I kind of run with. Person that popped in my head is a very good friend of mine named Laura Lee Pope, who's an excellent painter. Another friend of mine is Alice Clements, her face popped in my head. I think they have a show coming up together at some point. I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking of like Otis people, and then I'm kind of moving to Cal Arts people. Alana Mann is
we're not prejudiced based on where they went to school.
A lot of my old mentors, Carol Carumpus.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah,
interesting.
Those kind of folks.
So this is funny to be hearing painters coming out of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you love painters,
painters.
even though
I love them all, man.
You come from so much of a
I appreciate
of
everything.
a drawing and
absolutely, that's a good question, or that's a good observation. Yeah, absolutely. And with Carol, Carol's someone who also comes out of the feminist art movement here. Once again, following those two kind of train of thoughts. She's of course had a lot of commercial success and is shown in galleries here, but she's always part of that, and especially her earlier work, was real process oriented and maybe not the easiest thing to sell, but she was part of that the early kind of process movement here in Los Angeles. So she's kind of a prime example of a kind of person who kind of, I think you could place her in one area, but she's kind of gone back and forth in her career, and in my opinion, she's still very much underrated.
Yeah.
And someone waiting to.
Yeah, it's funny how she kind of went to. I believe she went to USC with Mike Kelly.
She went to USC with McCarthy.
Oh, McCarthy, yeah.
Yeah, in the early '70s, and she got her MFA there. I think in '71 or '72, somewhere around there. She's been around here a long time. Yeah,
that was kind of like an influential group coming out of USC at that
absolutely.
time.
Yeah, out of that group. So, there's folks like that. I got a good friend, Merwin Bellin, who's also of that generation, who, a lot of these people I'm thinking of, but a lot of them are pretty low-key and shy, so I don't know if they would be up for being interviewed, but...
I feel like I could get Carol.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think you could talk to Carol, and Carol has a lot of great stories. She'll blow your mind with all the stories that she has. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
And there's just, I don't know.
Okay, I think you gave us enough homework right there. I feel just tracking down them, that's good. But if you definitely hear about or think about any more.
I'll give you some more names. Because as soon as we leave here, I'll say, I should have mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. Text me or email me for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Another artist.
I'll pursue him.
Is someone who I've been talking to for quite a while now, Patricia Valencia. She's been here, grew up here. She's also someone who I have a very direct dialogue with. Sometimes she works with her husband. Might be able to get a 2-for-1 there. They have a brand new baby, so I don't know, man. One of you guys can babysit.
Those are tough ones.
While they rap, huh?
Yeah, actually, Cal's good at that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah? Okay, good.
Well, he owns a cat, so.
Oh, nice, okay.
And they're the same.
They're the same. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So,
okay, so
there's
that's
a lot, man.
Yeah, definitely. We'll send them all emails and see who sends back.
Okay.
Okay. And then other thing, our other little project that we've been doing throughout, we call side hustles, but it could be anything. Funny jobs that you've had, jobs you've done in the past, ones that you wish you had in the future, or ones that you do now.
Yeah.
Juan talked about kind of being his own boss and making panels and stretcher bars for artists, and then doing the magazine a little bit, the zines, and then let's see, we just not yet published, but will come out actually later today. was Linda's. We talked about Linda a little bit ago, and she talked about grant writing.
Okay,
and
right.
like so, everybody comes from everywhere, and it's an interesting vignette of how artists make it out here.
Right.
And I feel like it lets other people know that this is like a really complex career that everyone tackles in a different way. And you really have to come up with your own strategy about how you're going to make it in all aspects.
Right.
So is there anything you want to share with us about that topic?
In terms of things that I've done or advice?
Either. Yeah, no, we'll take it all. Like,
well, I don't know
if you were talking to a young artist right now, what would you say about that? Like, what are strategies that people use to get by economically?
Well, I hope that, I don't know, I came out of both undergrad and grad owing a ton of money.
Yeah.
And, of course, I'm literally and figuratively paying for that now.
Sure.
As many of us are.
Me too.
Yeah. So, probably if I don't know, like, I guess, those are the schools I wanted to go to. They were top schools, as you know.
Yeah.
And I was just going to go to them no matter what, I probably could have, if I would have thought about it more, gone to another school and maybe saved me a ton of money.
Yeah.
But, and I have no regrets about going to these places. The people that I met there, especially my colleagues that are now, and from both places, I love them to death. I truly do. So it's like, I met these people there, and it was worth, owing $100,000, know, or whatever.
So your advice is go for it.
Well, yeah, on some level, go for it. But, try your best to, just be economically sound and, think about the future, while you were going for it.
Yeah, so when you were in school, did you have to work too?
I didn't work in school. No. I don't think, no. No, I don't think in either one I did, and it was great. I just focused on my work, and Otis, I got it's always been understood, I think, that you get kind of better, grants and help as an undergrad than you do a grad student. At least that's what I was told.
Yeah.
And so at Otis, yeah, I'm trying to think I don't think I worked there or in any capacity, but I got some help there, a tremendous amount of help. Just coming in as a second year and blah, 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 I forgot what the grants are called, the Peel grant or something.
Yeah, the Pell grant and the Cal grant. The Cal grant's the California
so
one.
Those things aren't available to you in as a graduate, for a grad program, as working on your MFA degree. But, if you can, just kind of figure it out prior to going to art school. I think when I was in Santa Monica, I had just a lot of weird gigs. I worked a lot doing delivery type stuff. So I worked for about 2 or 3 bakeries during that time, and I just delivered all over the place.
And you did that early morning thing.
Early morning, yeah, man. Early morning thing. I would start work at 3:30 in the morning, and in West LA, and loading up my truck, and then be in front of my first stop in Burbank by 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So 3:30 in the morning, and there's no one on the freeway, and I could just a bullet, man, shoot over there, and then I would be done by 12 o'clock or something,
And then so that's when you would start the research and your own work.
Yeah, I think this was even before. So this is more when I was kind of showing in Chicano art circles, and this is before Otis. I was doing some artist assistant stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was during that period. I had a tiny little studio at home, and there wasn't too much research actually at that point. It was just more kind of traditional. Actually, during that time, I kind of painted. I say kind of because I've always done stuff on paper, so they were kind of like, I think, if I remember right, kind of paintings on paper and things like that. Mm-hmm. So then that was that period. But it was kind of an interesting period. That would have been the 90s in Los Angeles, early to mid 90s, with earthquakes, with everything else,
sure.
Riots and everything else. I was very much on the move and in the city, and just kind of point A to point B
Yeah.
to everywhere else. So I got to see the city a lot during this time,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. I saw OJ during that time,
Ooh.
Pre-murder,
Wow.
pre-murder OJ with his wife,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, kind of a weird story, but
Yeah, it's funny how we get these weird experiences here, huh?
yeah,
It's part of the fabric of the city.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, especially during that time where you just think like, well, on one level, like early '90s, mid '90s Los Angeles, when all these things were happening, it's like, earthquake one year, riot another year, OJ, and there was like these gnarly fires at one point, and there was just all this stuff. But when you're a young person, I was in my early 20s. It kind of didn't affect me, or if it did, it just kind of was like, this is where I live. This is what happens,
Right. Yeah.
But
Too
I think
dumb to know.
I was just thinking about this. If I would have been like, my parents' age, or if I would have had a child then, which I do now, I probably would have freaked me out maybe just a little bit more, because my responsibilities would have been much more greater than when I was,
Yeah.
had a few part-time gigs and I was going to junior college. Or whatever.
Right. Changes your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so that was that period. So it's all kind of jumbled together for me, and then after I got out of Otis, I got a job working with K through 5 at a charter school in Westchester, California, just a stone's throw away from Otis. Did that for 3 years, really good school, and got paid pretty well. And then I went to grad school, and then after grad school, and that's been 10 years this year, I've just kind of floated around and I've done various teaching gigs, Right now I work again with K through 5, but I've done some college stuff, some high school things. It's really tough because it's, you kind of survive by doing the part-time work. I mean, I think the way that many of us thought what would happen was that we would get out of school and we would get these, part-time teaching gigs, and we'd get real comfortable in these places. And, maybe these part-time teaching gigs would lead to full-time teaching gigs, and we would do, our own work, and we could afford to have a studio.
You'd teach 3 times a week, and then you do your work 3 times a week.
What our professors and mentors were doing, right?
Yeah.
And so then we got out of school in 2007. Well, in 2008, the recession happened, right?
Yeah.
Old Bush, almost buried us.
Yeah.
And it just became hard to do everything, including showing our work. So I think the resurgence of the artist-run space comes out of that moment, and it's still happening now.
Yeah, it still seems like we're recovering.
Yeah.
In the art world.
Right.
The art world's always the first to go and the last to recover.
Yeah, so, I know there's more galleries here than there was back then, but I think but also there's some galleries, now that were around back then that are closing now, because now there's all this talk about these smaller galleries getting eaten by these giant galleries,
Yeah.
So that's a whole other thing that I just kind of read in passing. But
yeah, and then there's the online part. We've talked to some people about the online aspect eating some of the larger galleries. Like, we know Mark Moore no longer has a physical space anymore, and his work is completely online.
Oh, wow, okay. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
And so Bergamot Station has changed quite a bit.
When I was an undergrad, was like the place to be.
Sure.
And now it's I don't even know. Are there still galleries there? Maybe there's a few. Right. Okay.
Yeah, but there's a lot of other stuff in there now too, which has watered down the potency of that location. And then now Culver City has started to rise.
Right.
And there's some newer galleries that are getting a lot more press and a lot more interest. I don't know if that turns into dollars and cents as far as the market goes or whatever, but.
Yeah, no, I have no clue, but that's so. Going back to what I was saying about what our thoughts were, well, those soon the reality soon became that that wasn't going to happen. So I think there was a handful of folks that from the very beginnings of those times really kind of got adjunct teaching gigs here and there, and I think they're kind of barely getting some stability with that after doing it for 10 years,
Yeah.
I kind of taught and worked, in doing everything from, like I said, little ones to, when I could, get a few little college teaching gigs here and there, and literally everything in between. I taught art history at the LA County High School for the Arts for 1 year, a year and a half or something like that, and did some workshops here down the street at Culver High School. So a lot of it is kind of, for me, has been connected to like little residencies or little things, like that was through the Craft and Folk Art Museum. I had done a residency at 18th Street Arts Center. So these things, they kind of kept me afloat, and at one point got a grant from Fellows of Contemporary Art, got a CCF grant. I think that's what it is, California Community Foundation.
Yeah.
So, I've been able to pick up some small grants here and there, and just have been able to survive. Luckily, my wife, who we've been married quite a while now, she's, through her job, has like insurance and these kind of practical things.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So, yeah, no, a real big deal. So, I'm able to benefit from that. But it ain't easy, man. As you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you know, this whole misconception that artists are just kind of like kicking back and fucking doing whatever, and I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's
this whole negative stereotype. No, man. I mean, all the artists I know and a lot of my peers and colleagues, they're busting their butt.
Yeah.
They're in some instances they're living off the fat of the land. There are some that don't have to do that, that for whatever reason they're set up in some capacity. But there are others, I think the majority of us have to hustle and do these types of things,
Yeah, even the artists that I've talked to that do have like the full-time teaching thing where they have insurance through the university or whatever, they still talk about it like it, it's a lot of hard work. It's not what you think it is, and
no, absolutely.
The demand of the students on their time and just their mental
that's a
acuity.
whole other thing. Is when you do have the luxury of that, then it takes up all your time. And then it's like, holy moly, like then what, So so
luckily,
the bottom line,
there's some flexibility for you in the way that you can.
Yeah,
you could go off and do Pacific Standard Time, and
absolutely.
It's a taxing. It's like takes a lot of time and all of that other stuff that goes with it, but you could do it.
Right. I mean, the bottom line for the vast majority of artists, not the mega folks and not the folks that have a trust fund hidden somewhere, a pipeline.
Yeah.
Well, then there's this other group that you're either working part time to make some work, or you're making full time and you're itching to make work.
Yeah.
Both of you guys are itching to make work.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a struggle.
So we all just have to make it work in our own capacity with what we have.
Yeah. Richard Hawkins told me one time, he says, hey, we were in undergrad, and he was one of my professors. He says, all this BFA, MFA stuff, he says, it's like a big sifter, and everyone gets dumped in it, man. And the people that aren't going to do it, they're the water,
Yeah.
And the people that, they don't fall through, And it's totally, there's no blueprint of who's going to fall through and who's gonna not. It's either
and there's no way to know.
You figure it out, or you just kind of, for some people it just gets too tough, and it just kind of slowly kind of fades away. Before you know it, you're not making any work anymore.
Yeah.
I think and some people, they go to art school and they. The day after they get out, man, they never make another piece again, But luckily, a lot of the people that I went to, both BFA and MFA, they're still doing it, and they're still figuring out a way to do it. And, it's like I said, it's not an easy thing to accomplish.
Yeah.
Just even thinking like that I've been out of school 10 years or my group, is pretty... It's like, wow, it's pretty crazy, still doing it, still trying to figure it out. But a lot of that is do you have a good support system? And, for me too, it's like, I really look at it as just, not wanting to let people down in some way, especially like with curators, it's like, I've worked with some really good curators and people that have been interested in my work on that level. And, you always want to do a good job for whatever show it is, but you want to stay in the game for the long run,
Yeah.
So that it's like, oh yeah, I worked with this guy, 5 years ago, and what? He's not making any work anymore. Like, what happened? You kind of want to just go the extra distance for all the folks that have believed in you,
Sure.
in the past,
Yeah.
from colleagues to professionals to even your own family. My daughter, she's a good source of inspiration. She just knows me as an artist, and I don't want to ever let her know me as anything else.
Yeah.
She went to my show yesterday at LACMA, and she was just like, wow, this is like really crazy.
Yeah.
Trying to take it all in. So I think those things mean something. They don't generate any money or anything, but it's much more important and vast than just that.
Yeah.
We're talking about much bigger issues here. So,
Right.
So that's always a kind of thing, to think about your surroundings and to be influenced by them.
Yeah. That was our conversation with Vincent Ramos. Awesome. We talked about so many things, and even more after we turn the mics off. You can see Vincent's work right now at LACMA at the Pacific Standard Time show. Check it out. It's going to be great.